After releasing a preview for a Patreon exclusive video, it's time we get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's talk about some of the most underrated superheroes of all time. And before you ask, no, this video is not a sequel to this one. I just didn't want to miss the opportunity on the title. Now, since this is going to be a list of superheroes, I might as well set some ground rules first. Rule number 1, the character in question must not be that well known, or at least not that popular in the comics, movies, or TV shows, with the only exception being that they had a really bad adaptation. And I'll tell you right now, at least 2 heroes on this list already fit into that last point. And rule number 2, read rule number 1, and pay attention to the fine print. Yes, it's that simple. Don't worry, I'm not the type of guy to add complicated ideas in a video that you'll probably click off in the next 10 seconds. However, I am the type of guy that will tell you to check out my Patreon knowing that you won't subscribe to it. Do it now. Alright, let's get to the list. Starting with a woman whose reputation reminds me of the expression, beating a dead horse. Even though she has a show and is fairly popular nowadays, her adaptation was shit. And with the fine print I mentioned earlier, that gives me the opportunity to talk about how bad it is. She-Hulk Attorney at Law is a show that simultaneously makes me both cringe and impressed by how trash it actually is. It's an episodic mess that centers on an unlikable main character who has the nerve to say this to a man that was literally hunted down by the government for having his powers, when the most she had to deal with was fucking Redditors.
It's not one or the other, Jen. I am trying to show you that we can live between what we want and what is. But we can't pretend like we aren't two of the few people on Earth that can actually protect her. Which is why we have to make sure of your ability to tolerate distress and regulate your emotions, especially your anger.
Well, here's the thing, Bruce. I'm great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time. When I'm catcalled in the street, when incompetent men explain my own area of expertise to me, I do it pretty much every day, because if I don't, I will get called emotional or difficult, or I might just literally get murdered. So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you.
The comedy in the show is mostly hit or miss, having practically the same type of humor that one scene has in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and we all know the scene I'm talking about. I also have yet to mention how this show fucks over other characters that frankly didn't deserve the treatment they got, so allow me to do that now. The characters in this show range from the category of decent to why the fuck are they even here, Wong being one of the biggest examples. His character shares absolutely no relation to She-Hulk or even Abomination, yet they both somehow meet and do wrestling gigs even though Abomination is still supposed to be in prison. Other characters like Daredevil actually make sense given the grounded nature of the show, and frankly, if I'm being honest here, he's the only reason I even paid attention to the show to begin with. The overall story of the show feels like something a 15-year-old femcel would create after she got catcalled by a guy she didn't find attractive for the 1 millionth time, and watching it made me feel like a male cat that just got neutered and knew it was happening to him. Also, before I forget, the finale felt like a waste of time. In short, She-Hulk has yet to have a decent live-action adaptation, which is a shame since she was in the same category as the Guardians of the Galaxy before their first movie. What's wrong? Am I forgetting something? Oh, you want me to change the background footage? Alright then. Honestly, it's actually better that I'm using footage of a game that canonically takes place in New York, because the next person on this list is...
I'm the immortal Iron Fist.
Iron Fist. It's Iron Fist, guys. While we're still on the topic of shitty adaptations, I think it's important to mention Iron Fist as well, as this show is the perfect example of actors doing their best with the shit they got. And I do mean absolute shit, because this show is absolute freaking trash. Hell, where do I even begin? The plot of this show can vary from being tedious at best and downright underwhelming at worst, not even utilizing the most interesting parts of Iron Fist's history, and instead only focusing on the bottom of the barrel, with the second season borderline edging us by finally delving into his past in Kunlun. But the season ends just as it was starting to get interesting, and at this point in rewatching the show, I just wanted to know if there was a karate technique that could get back the time I just wasted. The characters aren't too bad though, if you're only counting these guys, as almost everyone else feels flat, and are being carried by the performances of the actors, and this is very much apparent with the main character. Finn Jones does his best to make this character as good as possible, and God, it fucking shows. I can only imagine his face when he looked at the comics, and then looked at the script the writers gave him, although I think the crazy part about this segment is that this character was properly adapted and well written in a completely different show. I mean seriously, how the hell does that even happen? How does a character get good representation in not their own show, but in another one? And don't worry, you don't have to answer those 2 questions. Google AI did it for me, and this was their answer. Yeah, you probably thought I was going over another character with a bad adaptation, right? Well, not this time, as this character actually has a really good adaptation. And despite that, I'm going to keep calling him underrated, because other than the coverage his show got, Legion as a character doesn't get enough representation in other media, with the only only exception being the comics. And let's be real here, only nerd emojis are counting that. Overall, the show is pretty good, the actor's pretty handsome, and yes, the section is that short. But getting back to the shitty adaptations, we have Silver Surfer, who may or may not suffer the same fate twice. Don't worry, I'll make a video all about that. But getting back to the main subject here, I'd say that Silver Surfer is one of the most interesting Marvel superheroes, having a pretty sick backstory and an even sicker design. And if you don't know why I'm hyping up his look so much, then just watch this video and skip to this timestamp. And make sure to like that video as well as this one. Silver Surfer's backstory is interesting enough to be an 8-episode long show, and I'm sick of Marvel approving shit like this instead of the one that's actually good. Moving on, we have the Green Lanterns, specifically one of them, his name being Kyle Rayner. And before you type a comment stating that he gets more than enough attention in the comics, keep in mind that rule number 1 didn't just say the comics, but also the movies and TV shows. Kyle Rayner is practically the best Lantern in all of DC Comics, with Sinestro being in second place. And notice that I said Lantern and not Green Lantern. That's because this guy has worn every single power ring you can think of, essentially making him the perfect Lantern. I think Kyle Rayner would be a really good choice to introduce the Green Lantern Corps in the DCU. Yeah, Guy Gardner is a decent pick, but look at Kyle's origin story and tell me which one you'd rather see in the movie. Staying in the DC category for a bit, we have Power Girl. And before you say it, yes, I'm aware of how popular she is, and yes, I'm still putting her on this list, mostly because of reasons 1 and 2. By the way, her eyes are up here. Hopping from one female to another, we have Squirrel Girl. And no, that's not sexually suggestive, although looking at Marvel Rivals makes me wish it was. Doreen Green's mostly on this list because she has the potential to bring out a different aspect to the MCU, something that was probably already done with Miss Marvel's TV show, but will actually be interesting enough for me to watch it. Now, I understand that tensions between female characters in the MCU and the wider audience are pretty high, but I have a solution. The final solution, I call it. You cast Ana de Armas as Squirrel Girl, you give her a costume similar to this, you make the show and or movie that she's in have decent writing and a good trailer, and then for the final touch you make sure that at least one scene features her in a birthday suit. Oh, don't look at me like that, you had the same idea. And since we're on environmental superheroes, let's talk about how Swamp Thing is still underrated for the next minute or two. Environmental themes expressed in superhero media are always a treat to see, especially when they're done well, and Swamp Thing can be a good bridge to that. Even though it might not work, I do think he should get a movie. It would be a great way to introduce a lot of different DC characters that are more elemental themed, and would also be a great way to set the tone for the greater DCU, if Superman doesn't already do that. Of course, if the men upstairs decide to chicken out and just give him a less than 10 episode show, then I think it should cover these plot lines and have these characters in it. Plastic Man will be the last person on this list before we get to the honorable mentions, because he has a lot of potential in regards to storytelling in superhero media. And no, I'm not referring to the evil Superman trope that's been beaten like a dead horse. Wait, hold up, I already used that joke. What I'm referring to is the former villain turned superhero trope. And before you say it, yes, I'm aware of the fact that it's getting close to overuse. But let me just say that I think that Plastic Man will be different. In Injustice, it took several tries for Plastic Man to reform, with his example being used as to why Superman was wrong. And while James Gunn may not go the same route as the Injustice storyline, he can still keep the foundation of Plastic Man's art. And honestly, I paid to see that happen. Alright, now it's time for the honorable mentions I stated earlier. The first one being Ghost Rider. While he does have 2 movies and a TV show appearance, I still think he's vastly underutilized as a character, given that he's one of the coolest superheroes in Marvel Comics, with an origin that would make one of those biker gangs raise a glass in honor. Of course, the second honorable mention would have to be Gwenpool. And no, I'm not saying this because of my male gaze, but because of the fact that she can do what She-Hulk tried to do in her season finale, but infinitely better. Personally, I just hope that if they do go this route, then they get a woman that's objectively hot. The third honorable mention is Deadman, a phantom superhero I mentioned in one of my videos, who I also made a fan comic about, which you can check out via the 4th link down below. And now that I've shamelessly plugged the webtoon that I made, let's talk about the most underrated superhero of all time, which just so happens to be Saint Walker, who I find to be the most intriguing person on this list. The short version of his origin story is that Brody Walker's family died after they took a dangerous trip to a mountain containing a religious monument, and after finding the monument, he has a massive revelation about his religion and spreads the word of hope to the rest of his people, which ends up working out for the absolute best as it makes the sun shrink and turn blue, after which a Blue Lantern ring pops up and chooses Brody Walker to be the first Blue Lantern. Of course, if you want the long version of his origin story, then I'll link Comicstorian's video about it. All in all, Saint Walker is the most underrated superhero, Ana de Armas is pretty hot, and I'm looking forward to the new Fantastic Four movie. Don't worry, my next video will explain why.